So that winter, George Washington camps his army about 20 miles north of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in what we call Valley Forge. And this is going to be a brutal winter that the Continental Army is going to have to face. So there's no redcoats, there's no British army that they're facing. Instead, it's the winter and the weather and elements that's going to be their enemy. So during this winter time, soldiers had very little food, they had very little clothing. You had a lot of men that didn't have their shirts anymore. Soldiers that were on guard duty didn't have any shoes, so they had to stand on top of their hats so their feet wouldn't freeze. And you also had diseases that were running around. So over 2,000 men are going to die during this horrific winter at Valley Forge. But through this harsh winter, the soldiers that survived are going to be in drills and training, and so it's through this difficult time that they're able to instill in themselves that they're going to be able to keep on going, and that if they can survive this winter, they can survive the British. So one person that's going to help that is going to be Baron Frederick von Steuben, who is from Prussia in Europe. And so he is going to help George Washington. He's a brilliant military commander, great at training soldiers. So try to think about, like, if you're going into the U.S. Army, this would be the ultimate drill sergeant. He'd be the best one to train men to be able to fight. And so he's going to train these men at Valley Forge so that they can be better soldiers against the British and learn new strategies and tactics. Another person who's not from America that's going to help during this time period is a man from France named the Marquis de Lafayette. And he was a very young man, about 20 years old, never had fought before, but he was extremely wealthy. So he actually donated around $200,000 of his own money to help give these troops food and supplies and clothing that they need. And he's going to be writing back to fellow nobles in France that the American Revolution is something that should be supported and that their money should be sent to help. Finally, when we get to the ending parts of the war, the British are going to end up sending their armies into the southern colonies, into the southern states, because there were a lot of loyalists that were living in those areas. And so they hoped that the loyalists would come out and join them, but in reality, that's not really what happened. The loyalists really wanted to get revenge on the Patriots. They're not really there to help the British out. So in the southern states, the Patriots, the Continental Army itself, are going to be waging guerrilla warfare against the British, where they're going to be doing sneak attacks and hit and run raids, and that's going to wear the British out. And so eventually the British Army is going to make its way to Yorktown, Virginia, where they were hoping to meet up with the British Navy and to be able to flee. However, unbeknownst to the British, that they're not aware of, the French Navy had arrived to support in September 1781, and they're able to cut off the British Navy from being able to leave Yorktown altogether. So here's a map showing kind of the layout of the Battle of Yorktown here in Virginia. So feel free to pause and take a look at what this looked like, and you can see the French and the Americans on this map. So eventually after the Battle of Yorktown, so on October of 1781, General Cornwallis is going to surrender to the Continental Army, and so he's going to send his first in command to offer a surrender to George Washington. And just an interesting little tidbit of history, when George Washington sees this happen, he sends his first in command to receive the surrender. So Washington isn't going to receive a surrender unless it's from the general himself. And so the Americans are going to end up winning this war, and it's all because that they were able to tire out the British, keep this war going as long as possible, and this is going to allow the Americans who are fighting for independence to be their own nation to achieve it. But it was a very costly war. So taking a look at our casualties here, on the American side, we had about 6,200 Americans that died in combat, 10,000 that died in camps from diseases, so more that died from disease, and then 8,500 died as prisoners of war when they were captured by the British. So we have a lot of Americans that were killed during this war. And because of the American victory for independence, this is going to inspire the peoples of Central and South America to eventually rebel against Spain, to be their own countries like we were against the British. and eventually it's going to lead to the people in France being inspired to fight against the French government, and we'll talk about that later, about the French Revolution. So what ends this war is a treaty that's put together in Paris, and so we call this the Treaty of Paris. And so you could take a look at the map here to see what did North America look like after this war. So Spain is going to end up, they fought as our ally later on during the Revolutionary War in Florida mainly, and up into the southern areas, and so they're going to control all of this area up here. Great Britain is going to, number one, recognize the United States as an independent country, and so our borders are going to be from the Mississippi River right over here all the way to the Atlantic coast. So all this land now belongs to the United States of America. The British would get to keep their land up here in Canada, and the other important thing was that the colonists that had supported the British during this war, the Loyalists, part of this treaty was that they would have any property taken from them returned to them. If they had been arrested, they would have been released from prison. So it was all about forgiveness in the end. And so this is the end to the screencast on the Revolutionary War. This is Mr. Zoeller. Have a great day. Bye-bye.